Hi, everyone. My name is Kirk Bachman, and welcome back to The Ultimate Dish. Before I fill you in on our incredible guest today, if you're a fan of the show, please leave a review, rate, and subscribe. By doing this, you're helping us create more episodes and reach more aspiring culinarians and beautiful stories. I couldn't be more appreciative of your support. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Terrell Strayhorn, a socially conscious American scholar who's an expert in college student success and diversity in higher education. His work has been quoted in major news outlets such as the Huffington Post, the Chronicle of Higher Education, Diverse Issues, and newspapers nationwide. Terrell is also a professor of higher education and women's gender and sexuality studies at Illinois State University. He also directs the Center for the Study of HBCUs at Virginia Union University, where he's a visiting scholar and lecturer in education and psychology. Since 2017, Terrell has been president and CEO of Do Good Work Educational Consulting Group, partnering with hundreds of colleges, universities, and agencies on the implementation of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging outcomes for staff and students. Terrell has also published over 200 book chapters, journal articles, scholarly publications, and 11 books, including College Students' Sense of Belonging, a key to educational success for all students. So join me today as we speak with Dr. Terrell Strayhorn about the secret key to educational success, how to become a mindful leader, and so much more. And there he is while I am completely out of breath. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Kurt. I'm doing great. How about yourself?
If I was any better, I'd be you. I absolutely love it. Beautiful. So much to talk about today. I hope to start with a little bit more of a lighthearted icebreaker. I read on your beautiful website, by the way, that you're an accomplished musician, vegan, and a runner. So typically, I save some of that for the end. But first and foremost, how do you find the time to teach, consult, write, run, and play music? Put you right on the spot, right off the bat.
Right off the bat. Well, first of all, thanks again for having me on the show. Looking forward to the conversation today. And shout out to all of the listeners who will watch the episode and listen to the episode. I think that my sort of strategy for managing all of these various parts of my life nowadays is really a lesson for many of us who either are in leadership or aspire to be in mindful kinds of leadership. And that is, to as much as possible, see your life as comprised of all of these things at once. There was a point in my life, Kurt, where, I thought of myself as a professor. I thought of myself as a musician. I thought of myself separately as, I'm a musician at my church and I preach at my church. I am a runner. And so I used to think any time spent teaching is time taking away from running. That any time I spent running was time taken away from my scholarship. Until one day I realized while running and being at one with myself in the universe, my mind is at peace and that I had clarity of thought. And that while running, I might think about the next book, the outline for the next book chapter. And that if I, leverage the power of technology, which is ubiquitous, it's everywhere. My Apple Watch, my Apple phone, that I could record when my run is over, what thoughts I had about what I need to add to the book chapter or where I need to go next in my class. And so rather than seeing each of these activities as separate and discrete and that they are mutually exclusive, time invested is one, in one is time taken away from the other. I started to really appreciate that this is Terrell. This is the complexity of my life. I am at all times a runner, at all times vegan, at all times a professor. And when I started really embracing, this really is a segue directly into belonging. When I really started embracing this is authentically me, I found, wow, I have more time because I'm not blocking time on my schedule for one activity, but I'm starting to see how I can have my teaching inform my research and that while doing my research, I am connecting with my friends and my students. And even then, I am maybe, I mean, nowadays you can have all sorts of running devices and exercise devices. You probably can't tell from the angle in my room, but I'm standing up because, standing up is part of my daily exercise. So I think rather than seeing these as separate and discrete, I really started seeing them as one of the whole, and more importantly, authentically me, and embracing the fact that I live across all of these categories. Life is complex, complicated in that way. And that when I did it, I found, wow, I used to think I had not enough time. I actually have extra time that I can now devote to some other kinds of enterprising activities that we'll talk about in just a moment.
No, I love that. Beautifully said. I love the term authentic. We'll keep coming back to that. One analogy that I have to make in the culinary world, because ingredients also are not mutually exclusive. We call that, when it all comes together in beautiful harmony, that we have achieved harmony in the kitchen. So I love that as a backdrop. I'm going to keep picking on you for a minute. Musician, what instruments do you play?
Well, I was going to say, you mentioned harmony. That's got to go right into music.
Right,
And
right.
I appreciate any metaphor that brings together music. So I'm a piano player, all
Okay.
keys, organ, keyboard, piano. I learned on an upright piano. I would like to say that my first piano teacher, who was an informal music instructor, was my maternal grandmother, who's a choir director. And at her little Baptist church in North Carolina, she would allow me to tickle the ivory, just sort of play around on the
Oh, I
keys
love that.
until I would eventually go to college and train. But also I would say, can I say it this way? My strongest instrument is my voice. So I'm a singer and a instrumentalist.
Hey, Chef Kirk here. Just wanted to take a quick break from the show to chat about you. If you're curious about culinary school and the types of careers it could open up for you, our team at Escoffier created a tool that might help. Just head to escoffier.edu/tool. That's escoffier.edu/TOOL. You can get access to a downloadable career interest survey and answer a few questions to see if you might be geared towards the culinary arts, pastry arts, hospitality, or restaurant operations. Get more clarity on the right culinary path for you. Head to escoffier.edu/tool to take this easy assessment. Now back to the show. And was music your first passion, coming from your grandmother and hearing it in church, before you realized you had a gift for a voice in many ways, not just singing, but also,
I think so. I
talking?
mean, right. My grandmother, she's deceased now, but I think a lot about the lessons that she taught me.
Uh-huh.
And she was a teacher. She was a elementary school teacher, 4 through 6, or kindergarten through 6. And growing up, I spent every summer with my grandma in her little town in North Carolina. And, she told me a lot of things. She took me a lot of places. But what I remember most are all of the songs that my grandmother taught me. And she would not teach me at church. I mean, she would, but she taught me in her kitchen. She taught me while hanging clothes out on her clothing line. And she wouldn't just sing and teach me the lyrics. She told me, now, Rel, you got to sing. And she listened to me, struggle to sing some song. And she would give me honest feedback about my performance, sometimes telling me I need to practice a lot more. But as I matured into my voice, she would also be one of my first fans who would celebrate as I started to connect, as you said, come in harmony with myself. And so again, the angle of the camera may be misleading. I'm not that tall. I'm like 5'6", 130 pounds. So I'm a little dude. But I learned as a kid that my strongest muscle was actually, apart from my mind, my voice. And that my grandma taught me how to use it, like you said, musically, but also in many ways, how to use my voice to speak up for myself, to speak up for the things that I care about.
Yeah, well said. Ironically enough, many of the culinarians that I speak to also have some love for music, motorcycles, things like that. Um, if I asked you the top 3 bands of all time, would you have that at the top of your head?
top three bands of all time.
Or
Well,
musicians. Musicians is even more eloquent, right? Yeah.
musicians of all time. I mean, that's a hard one. There are so
Yeah.
many talented musicians out there. What I can say, um, I have, so as a musician and as a singer, I care very deeply about um, the sound of music. I mean, there are a lot of musicians today. This is no critique or slam to anyone, but there are a lot of people who are performers. They do, you know, very impressive dance routines, and they can put on a fabulous show. And sometimes the theatrics of the performance can overshadow the vocal offering. But I'm a singer and a speaker, and so I don't get caught up in just the theatrics. I pay particular attention to the melody, the harmony, the cadence, the soul behind it. So in that way, let me just offer three. They're cross genres to show the diversity here. I mean, one, I would be hard pressed to not acknowledge the musical genius of folks like Whitney Houston and Aretha Franklin. I mean, these are timeless kinds of voices that can certainly perform and entertain. But I mean, at the end of the day, you have a good song. Another musician who doesn't sing soul is mostly known for her country music, but is a masterful singer and I mean, plays instruments is Dolly Parton. So I spent
Oh.
time on the faculty at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. It was the year I was there when the University of Tennessee gave Dolly an honorary doctorate. And I will never forget, Kurt, when she came into the auditorium with just a guitar in her hand. And I was like captivated. This live acoustic guitar rendition, most beautiful song ever. And then lastly and finally, one of my own musical inspirations, and that's John Legend. Again, I find
Wow.
myself particularly inspired by those who are vocalists as well as instrumentalists.
Such a great response. I'm still tingling. I'm a country music fan, and Dolly Parton certainly fits the bill there. I can't even imagine. Can I just say right off the bat what an honor it is to speak with such or be in the presence of such a great speaker. I told Noel before we got started, have you listened to this guy talk? He's going to upstage me on this.
No,
Just
no, no.
so eloquent, so fun to chat. Let's jump into the diet. I want to hear all about your vegan lifestyle, when it came to be, what it means to you, how that fits in to the harmony in your cadence of the day, and then put you on the spot on where you go in the city of Chicago for some plant-based food.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
A lot there.
Um, so there are tons. You know, I became a vegan first on a dare, really. It was a challenge from a friend of mine who had been a vegan for a couple of years and said to me, um, you know, I bet you can't be vegan. I said, well, I don't even know what that means. So I had to start Googling what that meant. I was very familiar with vegetarian.
Sure,
And
sure.
at that point, this was in about 5 years ago. Um, I was pretty much vegetarian, although I'm from Virginia Beach, Virginia originally. And so growing up near the ocean, seafood was big in my family. I liked some fish, I like crab. I didn't do a whole lot of red meat, but I did do chicken. And so when he challenged me to do this, I said, yeah, sure, I can do it. And so literally overnight, November of 2018, I stopped, pivoted overnight to being vegan, watching, making sure that everything I would eat and take in um, was plant-based and not an animal product. And I would say that my vegan journey grew from there. It was first a challenge that then became a value and really a way of life for me. And it resonates, it's in harmony with so many other of my commitments. And that is, I'm glad to know that for me to live, no animal has to die. And that people ask me all the time, well, when you became vegan, what did you miss most? Not much. I mean, one of the first things I realized when I was a meat eater, shortly after eating, this will resonate with probably lots in the listening audience. I would be tired sometimes after eating, especially if I had a heavy meal at holiday times. But when I became plant-based and vegan, I mean, I could eat. I felt very healthy. I felt very energized after my meals. The other thing is I've been a pretty picky eater most of my life. I don't, eat things that are unknown to me. And I'm a texture kind of guy. So I've got to make sure that it looks and feels right. So I was being more intentional about what I would eat, where I would eat. Um, and I think the intentionality around my diet made me one overall more healthy, but also it helped me. I mean, I would go sometimes a whole day without eating because it's just the rush of my day and so forth. But because I had to think about what would I eat, where would I eat, what would I avoid, I was more intentional about it. And I think putting that focus on my diet brought a lot of the other aspects of my overall mental health and well-being into view. So I would say that that's been really exciting. And of course, it's built out from there. I mean, I'm now more intentional about the kinds of causes that I support, the kind of organizations that I support and partner with. I try to invest time, energy, and resources into organizations that align with my commitments around vegan lifestyle and animal rights and the like. And so that's been very exciting. I think in terms of where I eat, there are a lot of places. Before living in Chicago, though, I had to tell you, I lived in a place called Richmond, Virginia, which is the capital of the Commonwealth of Virginia. There's a really wonderful spot there called New Vegan. And I like New Vegan partly because if I'm honest with myself, and I have to be because we said we would be in this conversation, right? There are parts of me that kind of miss aspects of seafood, not like such that I want to violate my diet, but there are, vegan or plant-based fish, plant-based fish sticks, and things like this that are available. New Vegan has a really wonderful one there. They have a plant-based lasagna that is delicious. And so any place that does that, and I know it's very, very simple, and I should be embarrassed to say this, but I also pay attention to any vegan hot dogs, just because every now and again you just want a quick hot dog, and I can't eat those now, but especially in Chicago, right? You
Yep.
find these vegan spots that have really amazing vegan hot dogs that they can put all sorts of vegan chili and things on to make them just scrumptious.
You touched on a really important point, and we're still in the intro. We haven't even gotten into the
Oh,
core here. We're so hung up on who you are, and I love it. But this whole idea of, I mean, people make choices, right? Sometimes they're emotional, animal rights. Sometimes it's for health reasons. Other times maybe sustainability or whatever, right? But this idea that seafood and meat to many people tastes good. It's okay. It's okay. I have a very good friend. His name's Chad Sarno. He's got a couple of companies, plant-based companies called Wicked Healthy. And then he has another one called Ocean First, which just is about seafood flavors, right? And I've asked him several times, why is it when I go to the grocery store and I'm in that area of plant-based options, a lot of those options yell at you like chickenless fingers, and he said, listen, at the end of the day that might change over time, but right now we're just making choices for ourselves. We're not suggesting for a minute that chicken doesn't taste good to a lot of people, and people recognize it, right? So chickenless fingers, that's the easiest way to get my kids engaged in plant-based, and now they don't know the difference, particularly with the hot dogs, by the way. So
yeah. I mean,
no.
let me add one quick thing. I mean, so I'm a African American male, black male. My family, every single one of them are meat eaters, and so when I 5 years ago announced that I was vegan, and it was time and we're a Christian family, so we celebrate Thanksgiving and Christmas. I went home for Thanksgiving, and it's like, whoa! It opened my eyes to how non-plant based my family is. And so as I'm looking at this wonderful spread of delicious smelling food, but I can't eat any of it, maybe a couple of the sides that weren't cooked in meat, that very next year, and shout out to my mom and dad who will no doubt listen to this episode. They
Oh,
modified.
great,
They
great.
didn't change. You know, they still had their option, but they added to the menu some plant-based, some veggies that are cooked and without meat, just for me. And I think one of the things I offer to the family is like, hey, one night, let's all have impossible burgers. These are the plant-based burgers. And my dad, who loves, red meat, loves beef, loves pork, loves all of that. He took one bite of it and said, I can't believe this is not me. Come on. You got to be kidding me. So, I mean, to all of those who are out there, many of your students who will go on and probably move into the plant-based industry. Listen, there are vegans like me who need you and need your work, but also it is incredible what we've been able to do with the taste of plant-based
Oh,
products.
100%. It's an and, not an or, right? So that's what I love about that story. While we're on this topic, I'd love to see the connection to, over the last 5 years, being very intentional about your diet. How has that impacted your mind and your conditioning and your running? Um, Enhanced it, changed it? Are you at a point where you see a difference in your training because of a plant-based diet?
Absolutely. I mean, so the part that I always jokingly tell people, one of the most frequently searched, if you type my name into Google, the first thing that pops up is the most frequently searched thing about me is how old am I? The second is who's my wife, and I don't have a wife. So, I mean, whoever they are, they're looking for you. The world is looking for you, partner. So come on, hurry
Sure.
up.
Sure.
But in terms of my age, I have, celebrated some birthdays where I'm now more intentional about, or tell my mom and dad all the time. I used to, not think about running, not think about eating, but as you keep on living, as my grandma says, this body starts to change. And so, if I'm not careful and I'm not intentional about it, um, you know, keeping up with the pace of my day and the pace of my schedule will be exhausting. And I will find myself very, very worn out and tired. And so part of my daily conditioning is really so that I can run the race of life, not even a physical race. It's just to make sure that, going to airports and going to class and being on podcasts and won't overburden my soul and spirit. And so when I became vegan, again, I think the level of intentionality and focus that it took and it takes to be vegan. I just was in West Africa. I think I mentioned this to you on email, in Gambia. And being vegan is difficult in some places, but it's really hard in West Africa, partly because where I was in Gambia was a low income kind of village where people are so beautiful and wonderful and gracious. I mean, Kirk, families who don't know me would meet me out in the street and welcome me into their home and give me, their last bit of food. But they didn't know I was vegan. And so I remember one of the families gave me this wonderful Nigerian delicacy, but it actually is a, a bed of rice on and some sort of beef curry on top of it. Well, of course, I can't eat that. And so, but there's nothing more offensive than to, you know,
Not eat it.
um,
Yeah.
right, to turn away a gift. And so I worked with my host to communicate to the family that I'm so gracious of their gifts. I ate as much as I could of the rice.
Sure.
But I'm saying this because the level of intentionality that it takes to think about my diet and what I will eat transports to other places in my life or other parts of my life. Because I'm thinking about when I'm going to eat and what I'm going to eat, I also have right in that same space time to think about, well, when am I going to run today? And although I've got to, head to the airport, get to the hotel, okay, when I put my bag down, I've got to make sure that I get in 30 minutes of running. And I don't like to run on treadmills, although I will. I like to run outside. And so, if I'm later today, I'll fly to Cleveland, Ohio. Sometimes when you go to Cleveland, it's snowy and it's icy. And so if I can't run outside, I will plan to run in the hotel, but I got to make sure that the hotel has a gym and the gym is open. So all of these pieces of structuring my day. And I literally schedule all of it. I mean, I put it on my schedule so that when I land, I might get a text that throws me off. I don't forget, I got to go run. And so being intentional, scheduling it, and making sure that I, just like I schedule time to talk with you and meet with my students, I have scheduled time for what we call self-care, that I'm eating, that I'm resting, that I'm running. And what I found is, people ask me all the time, oh my gosh, you just came from Africa, you landed back and now you're on a podcast and you're going to fly to Ohio. Are you exhausted? No, because I think the care of myself and of my body, understanding as we opened with, I mean, I try not to exhaust myself and stay out super late and deny myself rest or peace of mind, because when that happens, when my bandwidth is exhausted, I have found that my voice is weak, my body is susceptible to all sorts of flu and disease, and then I'm tired and I'm drowsy. Well, nothing is a worse combination for a keynote, a public lecture, a classroom instructor, than a weak voice, a weak body, and you're sleepy. And so because this is my temple, this is my instrument, this is my offering to the world, I've got to take serious care of it. I'll close with this. I mean, I once read that some of the world's greatest pianists and musicians take out insurance policies on their voices, on their hands, because that is their moneymaker. That is their gift.
That's their tool. Yeah.
That's
yeah,
their tool.
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
because this body is so important to doing the good work that I think is so important in the world, I've got to be very intentional and structured about how I take care of it.
Such great advice. Let's talk about some of that great work. My team and I watched the brilliant TEDx talks, and funny, charismatic, and engaging. The Pursuit of Belonging. So many valuable mentions that I know listeners resonated with then and will now again as we talk about it. I'm just curious. I purposely didn't do any Google searches. I listened to the TED Talk a couple of times, and I remember the one topic that came up. Well, I wrote it down. You mentioned that there were 19 million students in college, and at the time, which was about a decade ago, 55% of them complete their studies. So I'm just really curious, without snooping myself, where are those numbers today? Are are the because I read so much about people, young people, not going to college, not finishing college, trying to find other paths. So are the numbers increasing? Have they increased? And are people finishing school in your research?
It's a great question. And wow, it's hard to believe that it's been a decade since that talk.
Right,
I still
right.
kind of remember it like yesterday. So to your particular question, we have seen some changes over the course of time. So if there were 19 million back in 2011 or about a decade ago when I gave that talk, we have since then witnessed sort of an apex or a pinnacle, as it were. We hit 21 million at some point. And then, of course, all of us will be quite familiar with the devastation of 2020. The pandemic hit, and colleges and universities many were forced to close. Some were forced to shut off access to campus, pivot all their teaching and learning online. Some students do not prefer to learn online. Some of them find online teaching and learning very difficult to navigate. Some of them did it, but they lost loved ones, lost jobs. Their aspirations and goals for the future changed as a result of that. And so we have seen that since the pandemic, our enrollment numbers are declining, and fewer students are electing to go to college. I think the other thing that we're keenly aware of is that we still have challenges when it comes to student success. That even though some students are choosing to go to college 2-year, 4-year, to seek a bachelor's and associates, or even some who are going for micro credentials and certificates, that many students who start their post-secondary journey do not complete. Now, the causes for that departure are very different. I know we're going to get into some of this, but one other piece that's new that was not even imagined back when I gave that TEDx talk is there are students, I have a special issue of a journal that I am editing right now that's looking at what I call ACEs, ACE. ACE in education and psychological literature historically has meant adverse childhood experiences. It refers to young kids who grew up with a disability or grew up and one of their parents were incarcerated. They grew up and experienced some traumatic experience like the loss of a parent or a grandparent. And what we've known for many, many decades is adverse childhood experiences can have short-term and long-term impacts for students in terms of their educational, psychological, developmental outcomes. Well, playing with that acronym ACE and thinking about COVID, I am editing the special issue of a journal that looks at after COVID experiences, because what I believe is we have all changed, Kirk, in ways that we know and that we've not known. Listen, before the pandemic, I did a lot of travel, a lot of flying. I was around lots and lots of big crowds and small crowds. Now, post pandemic, though my job requires me to do it, and I would say even my vocation, my larger sort of purpose and calling in the world requires me to do it, I am very mindful and at times hesitant. And even at times, I have anxiety and fear around being around large crowds, especially large crowds of people who are unmasked because of my experience in the pandemic. Pre-pandemic, would have never thought about it. Post-pandemic, I am different in how I engage large crowds. And so after COVID experiences, the special issue is really calling attention to the fact that some students start college and leave now because of these short and long-term impacts of COVID on the student, on their psychology, on their mindset, on their readiness for college, as well as on students get into college and they start, thinking about, wow, I thought I've always wanted to work in this field or get this job. But after COVID, for instance, I have a protege, a mentee of mine, who actually has always wanted to go into the hospitality industry until COVID. And during COVID, they grew up in Detroit, Michigan. They lost so many loved ones. Actually, after the Flint, Michigan water crisis, and then that was compounded by COVID, that they did a total 180, Kurt. No longer hospitality. They are interested in public health. I know people who are in public health who probably want to go into hospitality. So you get into college and you realize, wow, my goals, my aspirations, my thoughts about the kind of problems I want to address and solve have changed. And for that reason, people make all sorts of decisions that may impact their success in college. I think we have to study more, learn more about this, and see how we can then help more students be successful.
So I was going to touch on this. You've mentioned several factors that can contribute to whether a student goes to college or not. I love the short courses, the micro credentialing. Certain that's real today. I'm wondering how much, even if a student starts school, how big of a role do finances really play in persistence, in the ability for someone to get to the finish line? Are you seeing, we're seeing some of that where students take a step back, decide, kind of what's important in life. I'm either going to go in and grab a job because finances are that important, or I'm going to pursue this education, healthcare, for example, because I want to make a difference after the finish line. I want to give back. Are you seeing, is it all over the board right now? Is it different than before the pandemic?
Yeah, let me offer two thoughts here. One, I just want to affirm what you said, and we know from decades of research, and some of which is my own, that finances do play a role, and finances can be particularly important for some of our most underserved, historically underrepresented groups, and that might be students who are first in their family to go to college or to go to a technical or trade school, students who are racial and ethnic minorities and economically disadvantaged students, as well as students who, live in certain geographies, live in rural or urban inner city kinds of settings. All right, so finances matter because turns out whether you go to Escoffier or you come to Illinois State, I was at Virginia Union last week. I spoke at Princeton University. Turns out, guess what? All of the places I just named usually have a price tag associated with studying there. And so you got to pay tuition. And tuition can be minimal or it can be very, very monumental. So finances play a role. But here's the other thing that connects to finances. Most of our curricula have in it what I call hidden costs. That is, in order to, you know, do well. And again, I'm sort of staying in my own lane, but trying to reach across into yours, Kirk. And that is, I would imagine if I were to come to Escoffier and try to study, that if I could pay the tuition or the bill, that in order for me to really perfect my craft, I might benefit from practicing at home, right? So that depends and presumes that I've got a place of permanent residence or a place where at least I can go and practice. That place is well equipped with a decent kitchen. That kitchen might be stocked with pots and pans and the kinds of spices and ingredients that I would need to put together. All sorts of cost embedded in the preparation, the training, and the practice. It's not just for those who might go into, study at Escoffier. I am an education professor, and many of my students, even if they can pay their tuition, their preparation is enriched if they can do research with me. The research is not just to sort of sit on a shelf; it's to disseminate. And so the hidden costs are, the student has to have the time to be able to work with the instructor and not be so enthralled or engaged with having to work long hours and around the clock, and that they also have some disposable income to go with me to conferences to present, or that the university, the institution, has resources available to help the student do so. So finances matter. But here's the take-home point from the TEDx talk. Finances are important. We must admit that. And we must make sure that as institutions and as leaders, we're doing all we can to create equity when it comes to access to our institutions. And most importantly, access to the professions that we prepare people for, because I believe that, all professions should reflect the diversity that we have in the world. Whether you work in education or the food business industry, you ought to see people who look like you. But while we're doing that, finances alone is not enough. There are students who can afford it or can get the aid to fund the education, but they get there and for some reason, they still don't feel like they're a part of our communities, that they are accepted as they are, that their interests and aspirations for how they want to use the education is not valued by faculty, valued by instructors, valued by the institution. That, if you put it all together, is what I call sense of belonging. And sense of belonging actually becomes a more powerful lever, one, over which we have some control, but two, it is able to really produce positive outcomes for our students in ways that finances alone cannot.
We're beautifully in sync. Perfect segue into this concept of a sense of belonging, which really moved me. Let's start with at a very high level, what are some ways that we can analyze this sense of belonging in education, just in the education space? Let's stay there.
Yeah, so I say all the time that sense of belonging is a feeling. That's what makes it frustrating. It's not a temperature check. I know
can't check the
in
box, right? Yeah.
can't check a box. You can't
Yeah.
take one of those meat thermometers and sort of impale it in the person and then see if they belong or not. It actually is far more complex and fuzzy than that. But that's not to say that it is immeasurable and that it is necessarily imprecise. It is a feeling that reflects the extent to which people feel connected to others, that they feel cared about, that they feel that they play an important role in the group, and that their contributions are valued, and that they, not just their contributions, but the person and their contributions are valued authentically, just as they are by others in the group. And so how do you start to measure that? I know, I have tons of stories of illustrations of this, but I mean, sometimes it's as simple as asking a person, do you feel like you belong here?
Mm.
Do you feel like you're a part of the group? Um, and people can answer that question. There are other ways that we can assess belonging. And I tell people, you know, administrators, leaders, all the time, sometimes it's not just asking people, it's a harder skill that we must use, and that is listening.
Mm.
Listening to people's words. When people feel a sense of belonging, they actually use associative or inclusive language. And you start saying things like, Escoffier is our school. This is my classroom. You are my instructor. I'm associating you and I. There's a sense of ownership and connection. That this is our campus. This is our classroom and our course. And this is how we do things here. Inclusive. I'm always including myself. I'm associated with you, and I'm talking about in very communal ways. When people do not feel a sense of belonging, they use dissociative language,
Mm.
exclusive language, and they start saying things like, Kirk, how do y'all do stuff around here? Or why do you do this way? Or can you tell me where your classroom is? Or what are
Sure.
your expectations of me? What do you want out of me in your class? Listen to that. It's always you are separate from me. And if we would listen to, and it's not just words, sometimes people write this way. When academic advisors are sitting down with students and they start talking in this way, I think it becomes a cue to their belonging. It also can give us some insights into kind of interventions that are necessary. And then lastly, I think a way of getting at belonging other than asking and listening is really starting to look at some of the correlates of belonging. This is what we know from research and most of that, what I talk about in the book. When students feel a sense of belonging, they show up, they come to class. When they're in class, they're engaged. They are engagement is shown demonstrated through the raising of the hand and wanting to be a part of the conversation and wanting to be part of the illustration or the demonstration in class. They are ready and willing to meet you outside of class to ask questions. And listen, they're not afraid to ask the questions that they might have because they feel like a bona fide member, right, of the learning environment and they feel respected and celebrated just as they are. They're not afraid of raising their hand and wondering if, instructor Kurt will see me as a stereotype or if he will judge me as foolish and stupid or dumb. I'm not worried in that way because belonging creates this space of freedom and liberation where I know my membership is secure. My sense of being a part of the group is intact. And because of that, there's enormous freedom to then explore, to make mistakes, to learn, to try and experiment. So I think if we could start looking at, I mean, if I were a person in a school of any type and I wonder if my students feel a sense of belonging, I might ask them. I might listen to their words and look at their writing, but I might also pay attention to attendance records and patterns. I might
Mhm.
start observing how they're engaging in the classroom. And when they're in groups, working with their peers, getting them to report out, how did that feel? So, I mean, so many times when we are engaged in education, we're focused on the bottom line. What is their grade? What's their retention rate? What's their persistence? And what's the graduation rate? But we rarely pay equal attention to people's experience in the process of it. So yeah, you graduate, but did you enjoy the experience of learning in the process to graduation? I think that's where we really get to notions of belonging. How do you measure?
As I listen, I'm thinking it changes too over time, right? As you grow up, from being an elementary or middle school student where self-esteem is really not an issue. The teacher asks a question, every hand goes up because they may or may not know the answer, right? They just want to talk. But as you become an adult learner, even in high school, self-esteem plays into it. And this whole idea of feeling a sense of belonging. You said when students feel a sense of belonging, they show up. That is powerful. I'm going to quote unquote there. I read in Medium an article that you wrote, or were interviewed for. You said, quote, sense of belonging is a basic need, a human right, in my opinion. And what most educators, entrepreneurs, and business leaders miss is the powerful role that belonging plays in student and organizational success. So for students who are attending school, vocational schools like Escoffier or anywhere, Illinois State, or even parents who want to support their children while in school, what can they do? What can I do, Terrell, to foster a keen sense of belonging? How in recent years, I've coached my faculty to be comfortable being facilitators of learning, right? It used to be 20 years ago, you had to come to culinary school because knowledge was kept in the toque, right? You had to come, you had to become a sponge. But today, knowledge is everywhere, right? It's on the internet, it's listening to you and I chat. So I just encourage our faculty to just be part of the process, engage in the learning, go back and forth. I'm curious, is there more that we can do, that I can do, that my teachers can do, that you can do to foster that sense of belonging? And we're probably spending way too much time on it, but it's brilliant and it's so important. I keep coming back to it. You said you're an educator, right? So, grades are important. It's the bottom line. But this idea of, do you feel a sense of belonging? Do you want to come to school every day because that's where the learning's taking place? What more can we do? Tough question. I apologize.
No, it's a great question, and I'm going to pick up where you left off. I appreciate your um, own sort of very broad, um, perspective on education. I think um, John Dewey, the great education theorist, once said, and I'm paraphrasing, all experience is education. And this is many, 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 many years before there was artificial intelligence like Siri and Alexa and Google. And I was in West Africa. Um, you know, my host family would tell me, they're going to take me into the Brikama, which is, there's a big market there. And I said, Brikama, wow, where is it? And they said, Google it. Even in West Africa, they're like, Google it. Google has a PhD. Google is a master instructor. Well, the point of this is, because of the ubiquitous nature of information, it's everywhere. And, most young kids ask Google, Alexa, and Siri before they ever would ask us as teachers. I think it does change then how our role in the teaching and learning process. There are certainly some times where we will still sort of stand on the stage and be a sage and offer information in lectures. And, there's still very specific formula and theories, both in the food industry as well as in education, that students must master in order to be experts at their craft. That said, there's a lot more information available to students on a click of a button or the swipe of a page that doesn't require us to know all things, but it does require us to be available to students, sometimes to vet the authenticity and the accuracy of this information. As I say to my students all the time, there's tons of information out there. It's not all good information. It's also not all accurate information. And so they still need to connect with the experts, connect with the faculty, the instructors, in the vetting of the accuracy and the sufficiency of all of these credible
Mm.
and the credibility of all these information sources. So we become much more not sages on the stage, but guides on the side who help the student in their journey. I think the other thing, though, is that we can do kind of uniquely that these artificial intelligences cannot do. And that is students will come to Escoffier and come to Illinois State and come to, schools and community colleges for lots of different reasons. But one of the most distinctive characteristics of your learning institution and mine is that it brings a human in contact with another human, with other humans for the process of teaching and learning. I Google stuff every day. I talk to Siri every day, but no matter what, they're not human, right? So there has to be, as you said, when the student comes to the schoolhouse, it's not just because education happens there, because education happens on Google, it does happen with Siri, but it's that there is a value added of this experience that we offer when the student comes in contact with a human that they cannot easily get from Google or Siri. And here's one of the things that I think we as educators can do to make the learning environment more humanizing and also boost belonging. First of all, learn their names. Learn their names and their interests and their aspirations, not just because it's a check on a list, but because we care about them. We want to help them get to their ultimate and final destination, who they are becoming, right? So get to know their names, their vulnerabilities, their aspirations, what excites them. One of my friends who's a teacher, he calls it the rose and the thorn for his students. So he opens every class asking students, what's your rose? That's something that happened today or this week that you're excited about. It's a lovely thing. What's a thorn? Something that was a little frustrating this week or got in the way, maybe this morning. And you can have one or the other or both. And this he listens to and he affirms for students that it is frustrating when it's raining and you got rained on your way to school, that it is frustrating when you wasted 15 minutes looking for your book bag because you put it in the wrong place. And that for every person who's ever been frustrated, you just wanted to know that someone else empathizes with your situation and understands it. It makes it very human to have those moments. I think learning their names, getting to know them, their aspirations, affirming their experiences, these are lots of ways that we can start to foster belonging. But then I'll close with, as instructors, when we also take steps to make sure that we're not just collecting this information about students to sort of put on an index card and file away, but that we use that information in the instructional moment. That the examples, lots of my students in education aspire to, and I'm going to come to this because I know we're going to wrap up soon. They aspire to work in schools. Many of them want to be college presidents. Some of them, believe it or not, have histories in the food industry, but want to run their own
entrepreneur,
entrepreneurial program. They want
yeah.
to train people in the hospitality industry, and so they come to education to get the training around human development and pedagogy and curriculum development to take it back to your industry, right? So although I have not worked in the food service industry and the food enterprise, I have to study, think about it, learn what your curriculum, what are the problems that your students would address, so that when I'm teaching in my classroom, I'm issuing quizzes and tests, I can use examples that resonate with the personal interests of my students. I cannot tell you how many students sort of come alive when some example that I use in the classroom deals directly with something that they want to do in the future. And they're like, oh my gosh, that made it so, listen to this, relevant. Man, you really are listening. When we make learning relevant, when we make it connected to the passions and the problems that students aspire to address, we are fostering the conditions for belonging. And here's what I found in my research. If you can do that, they get engaged, they come to class, and they do better.
It's almost a sort of needs analysis. It's just so important to meet our students where they are. And the only way you're going to do that is to ask and to listen. And I apologize too for we are going long, and I don't care because it's a riveting conversation. And we haven't, I'm about to bring up the most exciting part of the chat that I was just mesmerized by. Another quote you said, Terrell, you said new leaders must, I love this, accelerate learning, secure early wins, create strong alliances. It's like a team. It's like coaching a baseball team. As a learner, new leaders must take steps to learn faster than they lead. So you mentioned this in your article, leadership lesson, learning to lead and leading to learn. And as I thought about it, it's to me, it's most akin to, one of the all-time favorite reads, the first 90 days, right? Any new employee, first 90 days. So in the time that we have left, and this definitely means we got to have a second podcast because we didn't even get to everything. But can you elaborate? I am just fascinated by this concept of accelerating the learning, or accelerate learning. It brilliant.
Thank you. Yeah. So that particular blog I wrote came out of my own sort of lived experience as a new provost and senior vice president for academic affairs at
Mhm.
Virginia Union University. I had been a vice president for academic and student affairs at a previous institution, but in this particular role, it was also during the pandemic. I started the role in 2020. We all know that's when the world sort of, was on fire. And so here it is. I'm in a relatively familiar seat, but I'm in unprecedented times. The experiences and lessons that I learned previously no longer seem to apply, right? Because I'm leading an institution that I actually had never stepped foot on. I'm trying to work with a colleague to write the protocol for how we will enforce physical distancing and face coverings and mitigate risk for people who I've never met person to person or face to face. I mean, it was just, a really surprisingly uh, potentially frustrating, but it was a surprisingly wild time. And here's what I learned from it is one, as a leader, and you exactly got it right. Sometimes as a leader, you are positioned to coach people, that I don't have to know everything. I just got to know what is our vision, what's our mission, where are we going, what are the core operations, and do I have good people in those seats? And how do I make sure that I keep the business moving with the right flow and momentum and cadence, right? Toward the same direction. It's back to where we began. It's about music, orchestrating various pieces and keeping them in harmony. And I can do that while I'm also learning about crisis management, new insights about the COVID pandemic. I'm learning new aspects of the business that I had not overseen before. And so what I learned is that you have to accelerate that learning, that people are looking up to you to lead every day. So that must mean that somehow over the course of your days, you are learning quickly, and that you learn how to, this is for everyone in your listening audience, especially those who aspire to leadership, regardless of the industry. You will be a lifelong learner as a leader. But learning, as we've been saying, can't only happen in the classroom. Because one of the hardest things, I mean, I completed a second master's in psychology after the pandemic. The hardest part of being in my master's program, and I've got a PhD, but the hardest part of that second master's was trying to be in a classroom while I'm also leading a campus. Sometimes you just can't, learning can't be, you know, um, restricted to formal learning environments. You must learn how to accelerate your learning. And that means creating for yourself your own daily regimen or curriculum. I mean, for those who will move through K-12 and higher ed, you'll know a lot about how to build a syllabus because you watch teachers do it your whole life. Then you become a lifelong learner where you've got to build your syllabus for life. What will you read that will have an impact on you? what podcasts other than clearly the ultimate dish do you need to listen to that will enrich your learning and prepare you for tomorrow? So I started realizing, wow, as an academic, I'm a chief academic officer, but a chief academic officer leading during the pandemic, working with the president and the COO, Kirk, I spent many more days talking about revenue generation, because if I'm closing off access to campus, that means people aren't in the bookstore purchasing items. People
Sure.
aren't at football games and baseball games purchasing food and items. So I'm not generating revenue, but the institution still needs revenue. So now the chief academic officer must be entrepreneurial. I know we're going to come to this. So hopefully I'll tie it in. Entrepreneurial and think about generating revenue, creating cost savings, running an efficient organization. These are all financial, business related concepts that are not my training. So the question became literally while sitting in that seat, how do I get an MBA without going to school? How do I accelerate my learning about these business concepts very quickly? Because I got to know it by tomorrow, or at least by next week. So I started putting together the books, the podcasts, the TED Talks, sometimes even the people so special shout out to all of my faculty at Virginia Union who work in the School of Business, Sidney Lewis School of Business, who would answer my phone calls and my emails late at night. They would say things like, I got a question about how do we monetize certain assets? And I know there's a formula for this. Can you point me to it? And they could, I don't have time to take an 18-week course, but they would give me guidance and
Mhm.
links that listen, as a leader, I had to follow the links. There's a metaphor there that sometimes as the leader, you must follow the advice of experts, to go and read, listen to the talk, take your note so that you can accelerate learning. And then listen, even when you learn it all, you're going to fail. But as my president, Dr. Hakeem J. Lucas at Virginia Union often said, hurry up, provost, and fail. But when you fail, fail forward. Fail with some sort of progress toward the goal so that when we can course correct and then hit ultimate success. I'll stop there. But I think accelerating your learning and building a regimen or a curriculum for your life and failing forward are some takeaway messages for all leaders.
And TikTok reels. I don't know that I've ever taken so many notes. I absolutely love it. We are getting towards the end. I would be remiss if I didn't allow, at least for the elevator speech on Do Good Work Educational Consulting Group. What do you want to tell us? It's fascinating, beautiful
Thank you.
website, incredible work. Go.
Thank you so much, Kirk. Do good work. I mean, I started the company as a way to really build some solidarity and identity around work that grew out of my work as a professor. I was writing and teaching and started presenting at conferences. And then because of the success I found there, I started being in high demand, especially after my TEDx talk, for workshops and speeches. And as I just said, I just went to West Africa and Gambia to speak at the University of the Gambia. So because of that, I have had opportunities to, do research projects and advise presidents and principals and superintendents on strategic planning. So I've assembled a really wonderful team. So shout out to the Do Good Work team of people who are committed to creating equity and justice in the world, largely through the work that we do in education across our industries. And we do it in a way that is not just focusing on access. It's not just about getting people into our schools, our programs, our certificates, and our universities, but it's that they can find success there. Success, part of it is graduation and persistence, but success is also about thriving and achieving their dreams. And so Do Good Work is unapologetically committed to those aims. Check out our website, www.dogoodworkllc.org. We are at Do Good Work LLC on all things social media. For those who will watch this episode, you'll see me. Listen, I tell people all the time, I'm going to be a professor probably as long as I can imagine. But at some point, like my grandmother did, I'm going to retire from this thing called education. I'm really excited about that because it connects back to the kind of important work that you do, Kirk, at Escoffier. I am a person who aspires, dreams that one day I will own my own local coffee shop. And in my coffee shop, I will create a space of belonging and community, primarily for historically underrepresented, underserved artists. I'm talking musicians, spoken word artists, visual artists, painters, who come from all walks of life, who want to share their gifts and their talents with others over coffee that will be crafted at the hands of yours truly.
Oh my gosh, I love it. And I'm not making this up. My dream is similar. It's a cafe. It's more of a cycling cafe, but
Ooh,
again, it's a place, and it would probably be called community. I just want people to have a place to come. And if they ride their bikes, even better.
wow.
Absolutely, absolutely beautiful. So the name of the podcast is The Ultimate Dish. I'm not going to let you go until you talk to me about plant-based and what in your mind is the ultimate dish.
So I appreciate you giving, for those who listen to the episode and in the audience. So Kurt and I, before we started the show, gave me a little preamble or preview of this question. I've been thinking about it in my mind. I mean, I'm going to close with a shout out to anyone who can put together a vegan crab cake. There is one in New Orleans that is just masterful. And I'm so excited because at the end of this week, I'm heading to Cleveland today, but at the end of this week, I'll go to speak in New Orleans. And one of the first, well, I'll go speak first, but then after that, I'm rushing over to have that vegan crab cake. But I want to do it this way, Kurt. The ultimate dish, because you told me it doesn't have to be something that I eat. It could also be something I remember.
Sure.
And growing up in Trenton, North Carolina, coastal Carolina with my grandma made the best pancakes ever. They were sort of, fried in this black, heavy skillet on her stove. And my grandma had this way of making food into a live performance. Kirk, if I may, my grandma would wake me up in the morning. She'd bring me into the kitchen. She put me in the stool by her stove. I could still sort of feel the heat of the flames on me as I think about the story. And she would crack open an egg and start scrambling in one pan. But then she would take her mix. And of course, I know that you and your students probably know this far better than I, but she would take her pancake mix, add in her secret ingredients. I still don't know all the things that she would add. She'd stir them up. But while doing it, early in the morning, sometimes 7:30, while scrambling eggs and mixing together pancakes, my grandma would break out into song like, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." She poured into the pan, start making sure that the pancakes are my favorite little small silver dollar sign. "This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine." I don't know if she went to a escoffier, but while making pancakes, she'd take the pan and flip it. "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine." At the end of the song would be the most beautiful pancake that for me as an ultimate dish, Kurt, that is the light. I can still see those beautiful golden pancakes from my grandma, and they mean so much to me.
What a beautiful, beautiful, best ultimate dish ever. First pancake ultimate dish ever. And the first beautiful voice ultimate dish ever. Absolutely spectacular. Terrell, can I just tell you, when students feel a sense of belonging, they show up. Thank you to your parents, and thank you to your grandma. Keep on living. Thank you for being here, my friend. Unbelievable.
Thank you, my friend.
Unbelievable. Thank you for listening to the Ultimate Dish Podcast, brought to you by Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts. Visit escoffier.edu/podcast, where you'll find any materials mentioned during the podcast, including notes, links, and other resources. You can also browse other episodes and subscribe.